first challenge, which we're going to talk through, which is the changing regulatory landscape. So by 2030, 60 cell and gene therapies are expected to reach regulatory approval. One of the biopharmaceutical industry's most closely watched regulatory developments is the FDA's, reauthorization of the Prescription Drug User Fee Act, or PDUFA VII. Because it provides resources for the FDA and CBER to have the capacity to provide feedback on development and review submitted applications and a whole host of other critical activities. So, Nina, my first question is for you. How do you think PDUFA VII will impact the cell and gene therapy field in the next couple of years here?
Yeah, I think PDUFA VII is especially exciting for the cell and gene therapy field because of all of the resources that are coming along with it. And more specifically, it identifies areas where resources will continue to support ongoing activities and also to implement new ones. And so some of these activities are specific to cell and gene therapy, and many are applicable to all drugs and biologics. One thing that was highlighted, I think, is exciting is recognizing the importance of collaboration and stakeholder engagement to facilitate patient access and therapeutic options. As Adora mentioned earlier, around CBER's capacity to support development, review, and approval of cell and gene therapies, that's a big one. These resources are intended to strengthen staff capacity in order to meet the increasing challenges and demands, as you just mentioned, Erin, in this growing field. They have to overcome existing resource limitations, as well as allowing staff to spend more time on meetings and submission reviews so that sponsors can really have that engagement that they're used to having in the past and also need moving forward with new technologies. We can look at other areas such as oncology, right, as a model where extensive engagement and collaboration has facilitated options for patients. So I think that's something that's helpful to keep in mind if hopefully new programs can come out. And for patient-focused drug development meetings, I know our listeners are familiar with these, and these are especially important to incorporate perspectives on product development, including cell-mediated gene therapy. I think I'll just highlight maybe two that I find most exciting, and these are not specific to cell and gene therapy, and they're highly relevant to challenges being faced by many sponsors. One is the disease condition where gene therapy often is focused to have well understood disease pathophysiology, right? And so therefore, the use of surrogate endpoints as clinical trial endpoints that could be the basis for approval is promising. PDUFA VII includes provisions that include early consultation between review teams and sponsors where the sponsor intends to use a biomarker as a surrogate endpoint. So I think that's exciting and should be leveraged as much as possible when appropriate. And then in addition, the advancement and development of therapies for rare diseases. And so we can talk more specifics later, but there are programs that I think are worth looking into, especially for cell and gene, where many of the diseases targeted are in rare space.
Awesome, thank you. Thank you. And Adora, same question for you. And I'd like to tell our listeners too that you and I did a recording of Cell and Gene, the podcast, specifically on sort of the PDUFA VII and what came afterward. And so I highly encourage our listeners to check out that episode because it was riddled with really good information. But for right now too, I'd like to give you the opportunity to talk to our audience about, the impact of what you think PDUFA VII will in fact have on the cell and gene therapy field in the next few years.
Sure, and I think Nina did a really excellent job covering the big ticket items, at least those that we are paying really close attention to as we go into the implementation of PDUFA VII. So I just want to take a step back. Erin, in your sort of intro to this question, you shared that by 2030, we expect 60 cell and gene therapies to, I don't know if it's to have reached or to be approved, and we are in 2023. So we don't have much time. And obviously there's quite a bit of development. There are a number of products in the pipeline that are either currently under review or getting close to submission, et cetera. And so PDUFA VII is really critical when we think about being able to meet that target potentially, or even having a shot of 60 cell and gene therapies potentially being approved and on the market by 2030. So it's a really ambitious goal. And so in order for us to be able to accomplish that goal, we really need to look closely at PDUFA VII and other mechanisms, not just from a procedural perspective, but we need to go much beyond that. So these procedural and administrative opportunities that have been included in PDUFA VII, they are just that. They provide us with opportunities, more opportunities to engage, more opportunities to meet, more guidances, and so on and so forth. But what I'd love to see, especially with CBER being in the position to add over 200 staff under PDUFA VII. So we're going to have a ton of new reviewers, a ton of new project managers. For any organization that's going to see a significant amount of growth, it comes with some pain points, right? Think about the organizational growth, the right structure. How do we get folks trained, right? How do we get the right level of experience? How do we get reviewers comfortable interacting and having some of those outside the box conversations that involve complex, trial designs, novel biomarkers, et cetera, so that we are kind of pushing the envelope and we're considering the possible with the science and the data that we have available. And so that I want to peel that onion a little bit to talk a little bit more about, how we really optimize PDUFA VII. And it's not just by taking the procedural approach of, okay, yeah, we have more meetings, but the meetings aren't productive. We have more meetings, but how can we really have some real scientific dialogue around some of the critical issues? And so with the new staff that's being added, of course, CBER is going through a reorg as well. So OTAT has been elevated to a super office. For those that aren't aware, they will now be called the Office of Therapeutic Products. And, of course, there's going to be a change in structure. But, they also plan workshops and guidances, et cetera. I would encourage CBER to continue to engage and look for ways to engage with industry and academia to really talk through some of the issues. What are the pain points? What are the more technical issues? What are policies that can be put in place to help support that? What are different ways that we can address some of these problems? Because, as from a sponsor perspective, we're gathering this data, we're gathering the knowledge base. FDA sees across several different products. And so we could benefit from the knowledge that they are gaining from their sort of bird's eye view across a number of different products. But they could also gain from the in-depth hands-on scientists and experts that we have within our organizations. So if we're able to break some of those barriers, actually convene a little bit more often, talk about the science, really problem solve, I think we have a shot of leveraging the opportunities that PDUFA VII presents for us at a much higher level. And so that it's less of just, here are some procedural opportunities, but we're really kind of taking it to that next level. So that's how I think, PDUFA VII could impact us, but really the devil's in the details. It just sort of, depends on how things unfold. Dr. Marks is really engaged and has been a great partner for industry for a number of years. And, we hope to continue to have that level of engagement, even at the review staff level as we move forward.
Thanks, Adora. And I think one of the things that I have gleaned too from having learned more about CBER and what the impact of PDUFA VII will be is, I think, additionally, what you're saying is clear communication and early communication and often, which I think is a big takeaway from not only what you're saying, but the whole topic in general. I want to move from PDUFA VII to the Fiscal Year 2023 Omnibus Appropriations Bill. So, Nina, I'd like to ask you, what are the provisions that affect the cell and gene therapy field? How will their implementation impact biotechs going forward? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think one area that obviously has gotten a lot of attention is rare diseases, right? So I think that's worth highlighting. There's a specific section called out there around submitting a report, for example, to summarize activities relating to designating, approving, and licensing drugs used to treat rare diseases. I think it's just an area that will definitely be getting more attention. And along with that, those should be a draft guidance coming out around rare diseases and common issues in drug development. I think adding on to what Adora was saying before, it's great to see these called out as starting points, but what's most exciting is how do you go from these anchoring points into that next level, right? Like getting guidances out and soliciting input from sponsors to pull that information together is great, but how will this actually be used and to move the field, I think is where sort of building on PDUFA and the Omnibus Bill would be really exciting for the field. There's some other ones called out, especially around contracting with some science associations such as the National Academy of Science and Engineering and Medicine, right, to start looking at the safety and efficacy of drugs and rare diseases in the US and in the EU. So more of that harmonization across, I think, is important. And then, of course, around, as I hinted earlier, the use of accelerated approval was a big one. So while this regulatory tool allows for patient access to therapeutic options that have been demonstrated having an effect on a surrogate or an intermediate clinical endpoint, that's reasonably likely to predict clinical benefit. Important provisions were included to strengthen that program. It now requires FDA to specify conditions or require post-approval studies for drugs approved under this program, which may include enrollment targets and milestones, including the target date for study completion by the time the drug is approved. And so what's new is that it authorizes FDA to require post-approval studies to be underway at the time of approval. And I think this will strengthen the program going forward, and hopefully we'll have more test cases in the near future where this is used in a correct way in cell and gene therapy to really advance that patient access for a lot of these therapies.
Nice. And I think I know you talked a little bit there too about accelerated approval, which we will comment on even in more detail in just a little bit. I just want to be able to give Adora the time to talk a little bit about your thoughts on the 2023 Omnibus Appropriations Bill. Same thing, like what are the provisions that are going to affect cell and gene therapy going forward?
Sure. Well, one, is obviously clinical trial diversity. There's a, big focus on that moving forward, and cell and gene is not exempt from that. So that'll be important for companies to consider as we move forward. And then, of course, I will just touch on one more that Nina already mentioned, which is accelerated approval, because that's top of mind for all of us in the industry. But I think it's especially important in the cell and gene therapy space because of the unique nature of these therapeutics. So as Nina mentioned, under the bill, FDA is now, they're now able to actually require that the studies be underway. I mean, historically, it was sort of loosely understood, not a requirement. And so for some accelerated approvals, those confirmatory studies could start after the initial approval. But a lot of that is based on the dialogue with the agency. Now, FDA has the authority to actually require those studies. And they also have the authority to take action on companies that fail to conduct those studies diligently. I would say that for cell and gene therapies, one thing that is interesting is that especially when you start to think about the RMAT, Regenerative Medicine Advanced Therapies products, as I mentioned earlier. And if folks remember, the RMAT provision includes language that allows for post-approval commitments to be fulfilled with continued monitoring of patients that have been treated in the pre-approval setting. So in a sense, for many RMAT products, their confirmatory studies are already up and running at the time of approval. Then at that point, it's just a question of longer term follow-up to evaluate durability and safety, et cetera. And so there is a unique opportunity, I think, for these products, especially to my earlier point, if we are applying RMAT as it should be, these products, and for sponsors to be able to have these conversations with the agency around what their post-market study should look like and the role of their registration enabling study, the role that study could play in serving also a dual purpose to support the initial accelerated approval, but also as a confirmatory study with longer term data. So from a cell and gene perspective, when I think about the provisions that have been included, I just, again, provides opportunity for us to think about how to tap into some of the provisions that we've kind of struggled with to understand, like the implementation in the past. I think it provides an opportunity for us to think about it a little bit differently.